February 1945. Manila, the open city meant to be spared, became the deadliest battlefield in the Pacific when Rear Admiral Iwabuchi refused the order to withdraw. 17,000 Japanese defenders fortified every street, trapping 1 million civilians inside what would become a month-long slaughter. What drove one man to defy his superiors and condemn a city to ruin? In January 1945, General Tomoyuki Yamashita, commander of Japanese forces in the Philippines, issued a clear directive: abandon Manila. His priority was to preserve his troops for a stand in the mountains of northern Luzon, not to sacrifice them in a doomed urban defense. American intelligence, relying on intercepted radio traffic and guerrilla reports, expected the Japanese to comply. General MacArthur, recalling his 1941 Open City Declaration, treated Manila as effectively undefended, instructing his forces to advance with the hope of sparing the city and its civilians from destruction. But Rear Admiral Sanji Iwabuchi had no intention of leaving. At 49, Iwabuchi carried the weight of disgrace from the loss of his battleship Kirishima at Guadalcanal 2 years earlier. After that defeat, he spent the war behind a desk, a humiliation for a naval officer trained for battle. Manila was his chance to erase that shame. Defying Yamashita's order, Iwabuchi gathered nearly 17,000 men, naval troops, Marines, and army stragglers, and began transforming the city into a fortress. He saw the defense of Manila as a matter of personal honor, a final opportunity to redeem himself in the eyes of his peers and the emperor. Iwabuchi's refusal set the stage for catastrophe. With 1 million civilians still inside the city, his decision ensured Manila would become the site of a brutal siege. Orders from Tokyo and army headquarters no longer mattered. The fate of the city now rested with a man determined to fight to the last, regardless of the cost. Manila in early 1945 was a city of nearly 1 million, its wide boulevards and solid concrete buildings now pressed into service as defensive works. Japanese engineers, following detailed manuals, began transforming the urban landscape into a labyrinth of obstacles. Streets were blocked with earth-filled barrels, steel rails, and overturned streetcars, forming barricades that funneled attackers into carefully prepared kill zones. Anti-tank ditches were dug across major avenues, while intersections bristled with sandbags and machine gun nests. Beneath the pavement, men buried anti-ship mines, designed for battleships and now rigged to explode beneath tanks and infantry columns. Tripwires and pressure plates laced alleyways and courtyards, turning the familiar city into a field of hidden death. Entire blocks were booby-trapped, with explosives wired to doors, stairwells, and even street lamps. Major buildings were converted into strong points. The Philippine General Hospital, City Hall, and the University of the Philippines became fortresses, stocked with ammunition and manned by determined garrisons. Tunnels and crawl spaces linked basements, allowing defenders to move unseen between positions and launch sudden counterattacks. At the heart of the city stood Intramuros, the ancient Spanish citadel. Its walls, 16 feet thick and built to withstand cannon fire, now served as the final redoubt. Artillery and heavy machine guns were positioned to cover every approach, their fields of fire overlapping across open plazas and narrow streets. The result was a city engineered for attrition. Every building, every intersection, every length of stone wall was prepared to bleed the enemy dry. For any attacker, progress would be measured not in blocks, but in yards, and every advance would come at a terrible price. On the afternoon of February 3, 1945, the first units of the 37th Infantry Division and the 1st Cavalry Division rolled into northern Manila. Soldiers expected a swift liberation, cheered in the outlying districts by Filipinos waving from shattered windows. But as patrols pushed deeper, the city's silence broke with the crack of rifle fire. Japanese snipers, hidden in upper stories and behind sandbagged windows, picked off men crossing open streets. Machine guns swept intersections, cutting down anyone who lingered in the open. Platoons found their advance blocked by barricades of steel rails and earth-filled barrels, every approach covered by overlapping fields of fire. Private diaries from the front described the shock. What looked like a victory parade turned into a deadly maze. Men crawled behind rubble, hugging walls as bullets chipped concrete inches above their heads. attempts to rush intersections met with sudden bursts from concealed positions. The familiar city had become a trap, every alley and doorway a potential ambush. Unit logs record mounting casualties in the first hours. Medics dragged the wounded from intersections while officers radioed for support that could not reach them through the barricades. Progress slowed to a crawl, sometimes measured in yards, sometimes halted for hours. The battle for Manila, once imagined as a quick liberation, had become a grinding fight for survival, with every block contested and every advance paid for in blood. Assault engineers moved street by street, carrying weapons designed for close-quarters destruction. The M2 flamethrower became a tool of survival, its 7-second burst able to clear a room or incinerate a machine gun nest behind a barricaded door. Infantrymen blasted holes called mouse holes through concrete walls using demolition charges, allowing squads to pass from building to building without stepping into open fire. Bazookas, normally used against tanks, fired point-blank into windows and doorways, collapsing makeshift bunkers or blowing apart sniper positions. Tanks and self-propelled guns rolled up to intersections, firing directly into fortified buildings. 155mm howitzers, brought forward despite the risk to remaining civilians, reduced entire blocks to rubble in minutes. The fight for Manila turned into a demolition campaign. Every strongpoint that resisted was met with overwhelming force. American commanders, faced with mounting casualties and unyielding Japanese resistance, abandoned earlier restrictions on artillery and air support. Orders from headquarters prioritized the lives of their own men over the preservation of the city's architecture. By the time the battle ended, 4,000 city blocks would be razed, an urban landscape flattened by shells and fire. The promise to spare the Pearl of the Orient vanished in the thunder of bombardment, as block after block disappeared under clouds of smoke and dust. Survivors would later call it the Manila Massacre. As the fighting consumed block after block, Japanese forces unleashed systematic violence against civilians trapped in the city. Hospitals, shelters, and even diplomatic buildings offered no protection. At the Philippine General Hospital, hundreds of patients, doctors, and nurses were bayoneted in their beds. The Red Cross headquarters, marked by the emblem of neutrality, became another killing ground. Refugees and medical staff were slaughtered without mercy. Spanish priests and civilians seeking safety in air raid shelters at Fort McKinley were bombed and executed, their neutrality ignored. In the chaos, entire families were wiped out. Women were raped and murdered, children bayoneted, infants killed against walls, neighborhoods were set aflame, bodies left in the streets or thrown into mass graves. Evidence gathered by the Philippine Commission and the International Committee of the Red Cross documented the scale. At least 100,000 civilians lost their lives, most not to crossfire, but to deliberate murder. The human cost of Manila's defense had become almost unimaginable. Assault engineers prepared for the final push into Intramuros, the old walled city that had become the last Japanese stronghold. On February 23rd, American batteries unleashed a barrage from 155mm howitzers, pounding the 16-foot-thick Spanish stone. Charges of TNT followed, blasting gaping holes through Quezon Gate and Parian Gate. Infantry advanced through clouds of dust and shattered masonry, meeting desperate resistance from defenders firing from the rubble. Underground tunnels and cellars turned each advance into a close-quarters fight, with grenades, bayonets, and flamethrowers clearing one room at a time. Japanese units, cut off and out of ammunition, fought on with grenades and swords. In the chaos, Admiral Iwabuchi gathered his remaining officers in the agriculture building. On February 26th, as American troops closed in, he took his own life rather than surrender. The last organized Japanese resistance collapsed on March 3rd. When the smoke cleared, American troops counted 16,665 Japanese bodies inside the ruined walls of Intramuros. The fortress had been reduced to rubble, its defenders annihilated. Urban warfare still threatens cities worldwide. Civilian deaths remain its grim constant. Manila's destruction warns us. When armies fight among the innocent, entire cultures can vanish overnight. The lessons of 1945 echo every time conflict enters a city. Some scars never heal. What lessons will we choose next time?